All right, welcome back to the Kaiser Report. Time to go to Los Angeles, California to talk to Michael Ruppert. Michael Ruppert is an investigative journalist and a leading activist in the peak oil movement. He is also the author of Crossing the Rubicon, The Decline of the American Empire at the End of the Age of Oil. His latest book, Confronting Collapse, The Crisis of Energy and Money in a Post-Peak Oil World, which came out in 2009, is the basis for a critically acclaimed documentary, Collapse. The film premiered to rave reviews in 2009 at the Toronto and the Berlin International Film Festivals. The DVD goes on sale today, June 15th. Get your copy of Collapse. All right, Michael Ruppert, welcome to the Kaiser Report.
Great. It's great to be here. Thank you.
All right. Is the Gulf of Mexico oil spill what peak oil looks like?
The disaster in the Gulf of Mexico is what we expected peak oil to look like as mankind reached a point where it became more expensive, more energy intensive to get energy than it was to sell or burn the energy afterwards.
All right, so just to give folks an idea of peak oil, in other words, half of all the oil that's ever available to be drilled is gone, and that half is the cheap, easy-to-get-to half. Going forward, all the oil that we're going to explore is going to be much more expensive, much harder to find, and what happened in the Gulf is the result of taking bigger risks and going deeper down in the underwater drilling, and is a direct result of peak oil. Now, what about those who say, well, look at what they're finding off Brazil. It's a huge recent discovery, and this disproves peak oil. Your thoughts?
Of course it absolutely doesn't, and I discuss scenarios like this in my book, Confronting Collapse, and that's because we live in an infinite growth economic paradigm where major corporations that trade their stock publicly, the media corporations, have a vested interest in making everybody believe it's okay and they can go on consuming and burning oil. In a classic example, and Brazil is one, the so-called Carioca discovery made headlines around the world, and people said, oh, there might be 300 billion barrels of oil down here. Well, the world's using 1 billion barrels about every 12 days. But what you see after that, after a one well drill, is that no appraisal wells were drilled, and then 2 or 3 weeks later, and I documented this in the book, you see these small correction stories that appear on the back pages of the news papers that say, this field wasn't that big, but what was planted in the consumer's mind with intent was that, oh, we have all this abundant cheap oil, and it's not really there at all.
Now, as the title of your book and film suggests, because of peak oil, we will see collapse. Tell us a little bit more about this, how and when.
The collapse that I refer to is the collapse of human industrial civilization. There are 5 billion people on the planet today who did not exist until mankind started using oil. The world's population was stable at about 1.5 billion people until we started using oil roughly at the turn of the last century. There's 10 calories of hydrocarbon energy in every calorie of food consumed in the industrialized world. If you take away that energy, the oil and natural gas, oil, of course, is all plastics, pesticides, it's in your toothpaste, cosmetics, everything else, then you cannot support that population level. Now, where my work has been unique, my first book is in the Harvard Business School library, is that I combine a very detailed analysis of a hopelessly corrupt economic paradigm. It's not just that the books are cooked in a couple of companies, they're cooked everywhere. We're seeing that in Europe. But I combine the economic corruption and the infinite growth paradigm with the lack of energy, and that's where we run into real problems. In the documentary Collapse, which is doing very well, what I say clearly is that printed money represents the ability to do work. Oil is the ability to do work, and the symbol, the paper money, is worthless without the energy to back it up. That's the conundrum. Now, when I say collapse, it's of human industrial civilization. It's not something that happens overnight. The Roman Empire didn't collapse overnight, nor did any of the other major empires that have collapsed throughout human history. A fast crash for human industrial civilization is 20 years, meaning that that's 20 consecutive years where each year is worse than the one that preceded it until you get to a bottom or some kind of stasis. And I said in the movie clearly, and it's all coming true as we speak, that the summer of 2010 would be the cliff event.
A cliff event in 2010? Talk a little bit more. What is this cliff event?
I'm not the only peak oil activist. There are many scientists, PhDs from all disciplines who have been studying this for many years, going back to about 1950. And what everyone has foreseen was an event called the bumpy plateau, which would happen when oil prices rose to a certain point and spiked, which we saw in the summer of 2008 with $147 a barrel oil. And then you would stumble along a bumpy plateau where oil price rises would shut down economic activity, and then prices would drop and you'd have a little increase in economic activity, and you would follow this until the point in time when you left the bumpy plateau and started an irreversible downslope. Our bumpy plateau roughly lasted from 2005 until now, but all of the research that I did and many others have done, but the economic research I've done says that summer of 2010 was when everything came together. In other words, after billions or hundreds of billions, actually trillions, 11 trillion in the U.S. alone in bailouts, there are no more bailout dollars capable of being printed by any government. We're seeing the debt service issues now tear Europe apart. They will be here within a matter of months. So you can't print money to get us out of this, and we will see, as a result of shortages and decline, serious price spikes this summer. I think $100 oil is a certainty before we get to September, and that will shut down the economy in short order. And then we start the irreversible downslope that we don't know how long it's going to take or what it's going to look like when we get there, and that's what my new venture, CollapseNet, is all about.
And you also make an interesting point in that the U.S. dollar in all fiat currencies, ever since going off the gold standard in 1971, of course, the U.S. adopted what is effectively the petrodollar, so that what you're saying is the oil collapse is taking away the only real collateral to the U.S. dollar. And so it's a twin collapse of both energy collapse, but also fiat currency U.S. dollar collapse. Is that correct?
All fiat currencies are doomed. There's no question about it in my mind. With the European collapse, which is well underway, and I think the Eurozone is doomed, and I think the euro is doomed, that's pretty clear. We're seeing a little boost to the dollar as people flee, but it's like changing decks on the Titanic as it's sinking. All fiat currencies are doomed because really what's happening is a $700 trillion derivatives bubble is imploding, and there is no way to service that debt. The only way for people to really survive is to disengage as much as possible from the monetary paradigm.